A millionaire sees his cleaning lady being humiliated in a restaurant because she didn't have enough money to pay the bill. At that moment, something broke inside him. Instead of ignoring it, he decided to change not only her life, but his as well. From a gesture of kindness, an empire was born that transformed hundreds of lives. And you, where are you watching this incredible story? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this kind of inspiring and moving content, leave your like now and subscribe to the channel for more stories that will touch your heart. The alarm clock rang at 5 a.m., as it did every day. Maria reached out to turn it off before it woke Ana and Pedro, who were sleeping in the next room of the small apartment. She got up, her body still aching from the previous day's work, but she had no time to complain. She had to make coffee, get lunch ready, and take 2 buses to arrive at the Almeida mansion at 7 o'clock sharp. As she stirred the coffee on the stove, Maria contemplated her calloused hands. At 42, her face still bore traces of her youthful beauty, hidden beneath a permanent expression of fatigue. The deep circles under her eyes told stories of sleepless nights, worrying about the month's bills. "Mom, don't forget I need supplies for art class," Anna reminded her, appearing in the kitchen with her hair tousled. At 16, she was the spitting image of the father who had abandoned them when Pedro was only 2 years old. "I've already set aside $20, sweetie. I know it's not much, but it's okay, Mom. I'll manage." Anna replied with an understanding smile that made Maria's heart ache. Her children grew up understanding all too well about financial difficulties. 40 minutes later, Maria closed the apartment door, carrying in her worn bag 3 embroidered dish towels she had finished in the early hours of the morning. Maybe she could sell them to a colleague at work. At the Almeida mansion, the morning silence was broken by the sound of Eduardo's steady footsteps descending the marble staircase. At 45, Eduardo was the embodiment of success, with a body kept in shape by expensive personal trainer sessions, gray hair at the temples that gave him a distinguished air, and a penetrating gaze accustomed to making demands. "Good morning, Mr. Eduardo," Maria greeted him as she organized the cleaning products. Eduardo responded with a distracted nod. His mind was occupied with the afternoon meeting that could define the future of the company. As he picked up the keys to his imported car, his gaze caught Maria's figure for a moment as she began to carefully clean the objects in the living room. For 5 years, she had been there 3 times a week and barely knew his last name. As he got into the car, Eduardo felt an uncomfortable twinge in his chest, the same feeling that had been intensifying in recent months. Despite consultations with the best cardiologists who assured him he was in perfect health, what the doctors did not diagnose was the emptiness that was growing inside him, even as his bank account overflowed. What neither of them could have imagined on that ordinary Friday morning was that their superficially intertwined lives were about to connect in a way that would transform them both forever. Eduardo canceled his business dinner at the last minute. The idea of another night of forced smiles and talk about investments suffocated him. He drove aimlessly through the city streets until he parked near a simple restaurant in the center. Cantinho da Dona Zifa, Dona Zifa's corner, read the faded sign. The place was crowded, frequented by workers ending their week. The buzz of conversation and the smell of home cooking created a welcoming atmosphere that Eduardo rarely experienced. He chose a table in the corner, feeling strangely anonymous without his expensive suit, wearing only jeans and a shirt. "Grilled fish with rice and salad, please," he ordered, surprised by the simplicity of the handwritten menu. That's when the restaurant door opened, letting in a night breeze and a familiar figure. It took Eduardo a few seconds to recognize Maria without her work uniform. She was wearing a flowery dress. Yes, but there was something different. Perhaps it was her loose hair or the discreet lipstick that colored her lips. Accompanying her was a middle-aged man wearing an impeccably ironed dress shirt and a gold watch that seemed out of place on his wrist. He led Maria to a table with his hand on her back, in a gesture that seemed both possessive and artificial. Eduardo looked down, suddenly feeling like an intruder in a private scene. However, something in Maria's expression intrigued him. She was smiling, but her eyes seemed alert, as if she were calculating every move. "Carlos, I really can't stay long. The children are alone," Eduardo heard Maria say at the next table. "Nonsense, Maria. You work so hard that you deserve a night to yourself," replied the man, gesturing to the waiter. "2 coffees, please." The lady doesn't drink alcohol, he added in a condescending tone. Eduardo ate slowly, discreetly observing the interaction. The conversation seemed one-sided, with Carlos talking about his achievements, his new car, his newly renovated apartment, while Maria listened politely. When the waiter brought the bill, Eduardo saw Maria's face turn pale. She opened her purse, searching for something with growing desperation. I only have bus, she muttered awkwardly. I thought I had more, but I had to buy school supplies for my daughter, and you invited me out knowing I didn't have any money. Carlos's voice rose, cutting off her explanation. Is this a date scam? I thought it would be different from the others. The entire restaurant seemed to fall silent for a moment, all heads turning toward the scene. Maria's face, previously just pale, now burned with humiliation. Eduardo felt something awaken inside him, something that seemed to have been dormant for a long time. Maria, what a coincidence to find you here. Eduardo got up from his table and walked naturally toward her, and the surprise in Maria's eyes quickly turned to relief when she recognized him. Senor Eduardo, please. Outside of work, it's just Eduardo. He smiled, completely ignoring Carlos's presence. Is everything okay here? Carlos cleared his throat, visibly annoyed by the interruption. We're having a problem with the bill. Apparently, my companion didn't bring enough money. Eduardo kept his diplomatic smile, the same one he used in tense negotiations. No problem at all. Allow me. With a fluid gesture, he placed a $100 bill on the table. Please keep the change, he said to the waiter, who watched the scene with relief. No need, sir, Maria began, but Eduardo interrupted her gently. It's the least I can do for someone who takes such good care of my home. Then turning to Carlos with a cold look, he added, and as for treating a lady with respect, some men seem to need lessons. Carlos's face contorted in a mixture of anger and embarrassment. He opened his mouth to respond, but Eduardo's calculating gaze, the same one that had intimidated executives in boardrooms, made him reconsider. Maria, we have to go, Carlos said curtly, standing up. I think you decide whether you want to go or not. Eduardo replied before Maria could speak. A tense silence hung between them. Maria, her hands still trembling, looked from one man to the other. I need to get back to my children, she finally said. Her voice was low but firm. Thank you, Mr. Eduardo. Carlos left hurriedly without waiting for Maria, who gathered her purse and Charlie with slow movements, as if trying to regain her composure. Can I offer you a ride? Eduardo asked, surprising himself with the offer. Maria hesitated, biting her lower lip. I don't want to bother you anymore. It's no trouble at all. Neither of them spoke on the way to the car. The silence persisted as Eduardo drove, following the directions whispered by Maria. The contrast between his BMW and the increasingly simple streets they were driving through was striking. They stopped in front of a housing complex of identical buildings, peeling paint and bars on some windows. Eduardo felt a pang of guilt when he thought about the size of the empty house where he lived alone. Why did you do that? Maria asked suddenly, still looking ahead. Eduardo reflected for a moment. Honestly, I don't even know myself. Maria felt as if she understood something that he himself did not understand. Thanks anyway. She opened the door, but before leaving, she added, he offered me a better job in an office. That's why I agreed to go out with him. The confession, so simple and direct, hit Eduardo like a punch in the stomach. As he watched Maria walk quickly toward the building, a persistent question echoed in his mind. At what point had he become so disconnected from the reality of the people around him? In the apartment, Anna and Pedro ran to hug their mother as soon as she entered. Eduardo, still in the car, saw the scene through the illuminated window on the third floor. The family hugging Maria seemed to have something that all his money couldn't buy. On Monday, Eduardo found his house impeccably clean, as always, but she was not there. In her place, an older lady explained that Maria had asked her to replace her just for today. Her absence bothered him more than he could have imagined. During the shareholders' meeting, he found himself thinking about that disastrous dinner, about Maria's expression when she confessed her hopes for a better job. He returned early, hoping to find her. Instead, he found a simple envelope on the kitchen table. Mr. Eduardo, I apologize for Friday's embarrassment. I appreciate your kindness, but I think it's best to look for another job. I have left everything organized to make it easier for my replacement. Sincerely, Maria Oliveira. Eduardo reread the letter several times, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest. He had never noticed her last name in 5 years, Maria Oliveira. Now a full name, a complete person who was slipping away from his life before he could understand why he cared. The next day he parked in front of the housing complex. He waited almost 2 hours until he saw her returning, carrying shopping bags. She looked even more tired than he remembered. Maria called out, approaching to help her with the bags. She froze when she recognized him. Mr. Eduardo, what are you doing here? We need to talk. I don't accept your resignation. Maria sighed, looking at the stairs of the building. Please, let's resolve this like adults. It was embarrassing for both of us, but it doesn't have to be by begging. That's not what this is about, Eduardo interrupted. It's about the dish towels. Maria's confused expression made him continue. Regina, my housekeeper, showed me the embroidered towels you were selling to the employees. I also saw that picture frame made from recycled materials in the guest room. You made it, didn't you? Maria flushed slightly. They're just hobbies to earn some extra money. They're art, Maria. You have talent. An incredulous laugh escaped her lips. Talent doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Eduardo, but a business of my own could. The words hung between them like something tangible. Maria stared at him, looking for signs of mockery, but found only seriousness. Come on, let's go upstairs. You can explain your idea to me while I put away the groceries, she finally said, with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. The apartment was small but organized with the same care Maria devoted to the mansion. Photos of his children decorated the walls along with some handicrafts that Eduardo immediately recognized as hers. A fabric garland on the door, embroidered cushions on the sofa. Pedro, a 13-year-old boy with curious eyes, watched Eduardo suspiciously as he explained his proposal. An initial investment to open a small craft store, financial guidance, and a share in the profits. Why would you do that? Maria asked directly after Eduardo finished speaking. People like you don't help people like me without a reason. Her frankness caught him off guard. Maybe I'm looking for something worthwhile to do with my money, besides accumulating it. Or maybe it's pity, Maria retorted, pride evident in her posture. It's not pity, Maria, it's an investment in potential, in talent. The ensuing silence was broken by Anna arriving home from school. The teenager stopped at the door, surprised to see her mother's boss sitting in her living room. What's going on? She asked, looking from one to the other. Senor Eduardo came to offer me a deal. Maria replied in a tone that did not reveal what she thought of the offer. Anna approached protectively. What kind of deal? As Eduardo repeated his proposal, he noticed how Anna's eyes lit up, contrasting with her mother's skepticism. At the back of the room, Pedro also listened attentively. Mom, this is incredible, Anna exclaimed. You've always dreamed of selling your pieces. Dreaming is one thing, Anna. Reality is another, Maria replied. But Eduardo noticed a crack in her resistance. When he got up to leave, he left his card on the table. Think about it. Not as your former boss, but as a potential partner. Anna caught up with him at the door. She'll accept, she whispered with confidence. She just needs time. She's afraid of the unknown. Eduardo smiled at the young woman. We all are, Anna. We all are. As he drove back to his empty mansion, Eduardo wondered which of the two was taking the greater risk in this unexpected proposal. 3 days passed with no news from Maria. Eduardo immersed himself in work, trying to ignore the persistent thought that his proposal had been rejected. On Wednesday, he received a message on his cell phone from an unknown number. This is Maria Oliveira. Can we talk about your proposal? Tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Dona Zefa's corner? Eduardo felt a wave of relief that surprised him. He replied immediately, I'll be there. At the restaurant, Maria was already waiting for him, wearing a simple blue blouse that matched her eyes, a detail that Eduardo had never noticed before. On the table was a worn plastic folder containing some carefully organized papers. I brought some ideas, she said without preamble when he sat down. Also, conditions. Eduardo couldn't help but smile. This was not the submissive Maria he had known as a maid, but a determined woman with a voice of her own. He let it out of his ears. Maria opened the folder revealing drawings of handmade pieces, handwritten cost calculations, and even a rudimentary sketch of a store layout. I've been thinking about this for longer than I'd like to admit, she confessed, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. I always thought it would just stay on paper. It's a solid plan. Eduardo commented, genuinely impressed with the level of detail, but mentioned conditions. Maria straightened her posture as if gathering courage. First, I want a formal contract written by a lawyer other than yours. Second, I want to learn everything about the business. Accounting, marketing, management. I don't want to be just the artisan. Eduardo nodded, admiring her foresight. Fair enough. What else? Third and most important, Maria paused, her eyes meeting his intensely. If this goes wrong, you won't try to save me again. Failure will be just that, failure, not an eternal debt of gratitude. The final condition took him by surprise. Eduardo realized that Maria had understood something about him that even he hadn't fully articulated. Part of his motivation came from a desire to be the hero, to feel useful, important. There's a condition too, Eduardo replied after a moment's reflection. If it works, you'll help other people like you start their own businesses. A genuine smile lit up Maria's face for the first time. Had you thought about that? She said, pointing to a sheet at the end of the folder titled Future Expansion, Community Training. That night, as they shared a simple meal, they were no longer boss and employee, but two adults with different stories, charting a common path. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Eduardo talked about the challenges of starting his first business. Maria shared how she learned the craft from her grandmother. Why have we never talked like this before? Eduardo asked as the restaurant began to empty. Maria shrugged, a gesture that carried the weight of different social worlds. You never asked. I never offered. That's how it works. It shouldn't be. He muttered more to himself than to her. As they said goodbye, Eduardo felt a restlessness different from the usual anxiety that accompanied him. It was anticipation, something I hadn't felt in years. We'll start on Monday, he said, extending his hand. Maria hesitated for a moment before shaking it. Monday, she agreed, sealing a pact that neither of them knew exactly where it would take them. On the way home, Eduardo wondered how many other Marias crossed his path every day. Invisible people, with dormant dreams, talents hidden under layers of need and survival. And for the first time in a long time, the emptiness in his chest seemed a little less deep. The small commercial space on Flower Street had been a failed lottery shop. Now, after 2 weeks of intense renovation, it had been transformed into Hands That Create, a name chosen by Pedro, who revealed a surprising talent for marketing. Maria contemplated the newly installed shelves, still empty but full of possibilities. Tana, at her side, took pictures with her new cell phone, an unexpected gift from Eduardo for posting on social media. According to him, do you think I made the right choice? Maria asked her daughter, insecurity evident in her voice. Anna lowered her phone, looking at her mother with a maturity beyond her 16 years. For the first time, I see you excited about something other than survival, Mom. That alone makes it worthwhile. The doorbell announced Eduardo's arrival carrying cardboard boxes. Behind him, two employees carried a rustic wooden counter. An opening gift, he announced with a smile. My carpenter followed the design you made exactly. Maria ran her fingers over the counter, admiring the perfect finish. It's exactly as I imagined, she murmured excitedly. The following weeks were a whirlwind. During the day, Maria worked tirelessly, producing pieces for the opening. At night, Eduardo taught her about financial spreadsheets, pricing strategies, and inventory management. One of those nights, while they were reviewing the projected cash flow in Maria's apartment, Pedro appeared in the living room with a tray of improvised sandwiches. You guys work too hard, the boy commented. Placing the tray between them, Eduardo smiled, realizing that he had spent more time in this small apartment in the last few weeks than in any family environment in years. Your mother is a dedicated student. She always has been. Pedro replied proudly, sitting down next to them. At school, they say I'm just like her. Maria ruffled her son's hair affectionately. Pedro got an A in math last week. Math, huh? Eduardo commented, studying the boy with new interest. Maybe you can help us, Messed us projections. Pedro's eyes lit up at the suggestion. Eduardo passed him the spreadsheet, explaining the calculations. To his surprise, the boy quickly pointed out a mistake that they had both overlooked. I think we found our accountant, Eduardo joked, but the look of gratitude Maria gave him said much more. On the eve of the opening, the store was ready. Carefully arranged handmade pieces created a welcoming and unique atmosphere. Each item, from picture frames to restored small furniture, told a story through Maria's skilled hands. What if no one shows up tomorrow? Maria asked, adjusting an arrangement of embroidered pillows for the 10th time. Eduardo, who had been watching her growing nervousness throughout the day, approached her. Then we'll have a beautifully arranged store to try again the next day. You make it look so simple. Why should it be simple, Maria? Failure is only final if you stop trying. She turned to him, a hesitant question in her eyes. How did someone like you end up caring about someone like me? The question hung between them, laden with implications about different worlds, social barriers, unlikely possibilities. Maybe I was looking for something real in a world I built with appearances. Eduardo replied, surprising himself with his honesty. A moment of silent understanding passed between them, interrupted by the ring of Maria's cell phone. It was Anna asking what time they would be home. As Maria closed the store, Eduardo watched her check every detail with loving care. He realized that at some point during those weeks, the dynamic between them had changed. It was no longer the businessman helping the cleaning lady. They were two partners building something together. Something he was beginning to suspect went far beyond a craft store. On the sidewalk, as they said goodbye, Eduardo had the urge to hug her, but he restrained himself, uncertain of the invisible boundaries that still existed between them. Tomorrow is the big day, he said, opting for a formal handshake. Maria felt it, a mixture of fear and expectation in his gaze. Whatever God wants. No, Eduardo, she corrected gently. Whatever your hands create. On the way home, Eduardo couldn't stop thinking about the brief touch of Maria's hands, hands that told stories of hard work and now of renewed hope. And he wondered, not for the first time, who was really being transformed on this unexpected journey. The opening attracted more people than Maria could ever have imagined. Anna's digital marketing strategy, combined with Eduardo's contacts, created a surprising buzz around the new store. I want 3 of these pillows for my living room, an elegant lady commented, admiring the handiwork. They're unique pieces, aren't they? Maria nodded, still getting used to being seen as a craftswoman and not a cleaning lady. Each piece has its own story. Eduardo watched from afar, deliberately staying behind the scenes. This was Maria's moment, her chance to shine without his shadow, overshadowing her achievement. Anna circulated around the store taking pictures of customers with the pieces, creating content for social media. Meanwhile, Pedro, surprisingly confident for a 13-year-old boy, operated the cash register efficiently. When the last customer left, Maria closed the door and turned to her family and Eduardo, incredulous. We sold almost half the stock, Pedro announced proudly, having done the math. And we have 3 special orders. Is this real? Did this really happen? Maria asked, a trembling smile on her lips. Eduardo opened a bottle of sparkling wine he had brought for the first day of many successes. The toast sealed a moment that none of them would ever forget. For Maria, it was the realization of a dream she had hardly dared to have. For her children, it was a living lesson that circumstances do not determine destinies. For Eduardo, it was the rediscovery of a form of satisfaction that no million-dollar contract had ever provided. In the weeks that followed, a routine was established. Maria produced new pieces, taught craft techniques in workshops that quickly became popular, and gradually learned the administrative aspects of the business. Eduardo showed up a few times a week, always with suggestions, but increasingly confident in letting her make the decisions. It was on a quiet afternoon, almost 2 months after the opening, that the first crisis arose. Maria was checking the cash book when her face paled. Something's wrong, she murmured. The accounts don't balance. Eduardo approached, examining the numbers. You're right. We have a deficit of almost $3,000. The immediate panic in Maria's eyes made him realize how much she still feared losing everything. It must have been my mistake, she whispered. I should never have stopped. Eduardo interrupted her firmly. This happens in any business. Let's figure it out together. Careful investigation revealed the problem. A supplier had charged twice, and some card sales had not been cleared due to a system error. See? Technical problems aren't your fault, Eduardo explained, relieved that it was something simple to fix. Maria felt relieved, but he sensed that something was still bothering her. What is it? What if it had been my fault? She asked, her vulnerability exposed. What if I'm not able to handle this on my own? Eduardo recognized in that question all the fears he himself had faced when starting his company, fears he had forgotten after years of automatic success. Maria, do you think I've never made mistakes? My first business almost went bankrupt 3 times in the first year. The difference is that I had a wealthy family to support me when I fell. She looked at him in surprise. You never mention that because it's not the part of the story people want to hear. He shrugged. They prefer the myth of the brilliant entrepreneur who never stumbles. That night, after resolving the financial issue, they walked together to the bus stop, a routine they had established without realizing it. I think I need to learn more about financial management, Maria commented thoughtfully. I don't want to always depend on you to solve problems. Eduardo felt an unexpected pang at her words. That's what he was to her, just a temporary problem solver. I can recommend some courses, he offered, keeping his voice neutral. Maria stopped walking and turned to him. Eduardo, don't get me wrong. I'm eternally grateful for everything you've done, but I need to know that I can do this on my own if I leave. She completed the unspoken sentence. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Eduardo realized that while they were building this business together, they had never discussed what would happen next. What would be the end of this unusual arrangement? People like you eventually move on, Maria finally said with wisdom gained from experience. It's no one's fault. It's just how life works. Before Eduardo could respond, the bus arrived. Maria waved goodbye, leaving him alone on the sidewalk with thoughts he had never considered before. That night in his quiet mansion, Eduardo faced uncomfortable truths about himself. Was this project just a temporary distraction from the emptiness in his life? What if it was more than that? What was he really building with Maria? A business? A friendship? Or something he didn't yet have the courage to name? Eduardo, we need to talk. The voice of Carlos Mendez, his majority partner, had that tone Eduardo knew well, the prelude to imminent conflict. They were in the company's meeting room, the city skyline framing the tension between them. Over the past 3 months, Eduardo had gradually reduced his time at the office, delegating responsibilities to devote himself to the project with Maria. The board is concerned about your outside involvement, Carlos continued, sliding a folder across the table. We investigated that craft store. Eduardo felt a wave of anger rising through his body. You investigated me. We investigated an undeclared investment by an executive director. Carlos corrected him coldly. A suburban store run by your former maid. Frankly, Eduardo, you've lost your mind. The implications in Carlos's tone were clear, and Eduardo had to restrain the urge to punch him. My personal life is none of the company's business, except when it affects your performance. 3 missed meetings in the last month, Eduardo. 3, to play savior of the poor with a woman who happens to be attractive. Eduardo stood up abruptly, causing the swivel chair to hit the wall. Be careful what you insinuate, Carlos. For a moment, the two men stared at each other. Decades of business partnerships stretched to the limit. Carlos finally sighed, backing down. Look, I'm not saying you should abandon your charity project. I'm just asking you to put your priorities in order. We're about to close the biggest deal in our history. Eduardo nodded mechanically, picking up his briefcase without opening it. Understood. I'll be at the next meeting. Leaving the building, he felt suffocated for the first time by the symbols of success that had once defined him. The imported car, the Italian suit, the Swiss watch. He drove aimlessly until he found himself almost instinctively parking in front of Hands That Create. Through the window, he saw Maria leading an embroidery workshop for 6 women. Her animated face as she explained the techniques contrasted with the memory of the downcast woman who had cleaned his house months earlier. He remained in the car watching. His cell phone rang. It was his assistant reminding him of the video conference in 5 minutes. Work calling, duty calling, the life he had built demanding his attention. When he finally entered the store, Maria briefly interrupted the class to greet him. I wasn't expecting you today. Just passing by, he replied, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. Everything okay? Great. Online sales started yesterday thanks to the website Anna developed. Eduardo smiled, genuinely impressed with the progress. You look tired. I've been working late. I received a large order for a boutique hotel, 20 custom pieces. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. Eduardo felt a satisfaction that his company's financial reports rarely provided. "Can I talk to you after class?" Maria nodded and returned to the group. Eduardo sat at the back of the store, discreetly answering a few emails on his cell phone while he waited. He watched how Maria interacted with the students. Patient, generous with knowledge, but firm in her instructions. A natural leader who just needed an opportunity. When the last student left, Maria sat down next to him, exhausted but satisfied. These women are incredible. Two of them had been unemployed for over a year. "Are you building something important here?" Eduardo commented, feeling the weight of the folder Carlos had given him still in his briefcase. "We are," she corrected, then noticed his expression. "Did something happen?" Eduardo hesitated. How could he explain the corporate world that now seemed so distant from everything they were building there? "My partners are questioning my involvement here." The immediate understanding in Maria's eyes surprised him. No drama, no panic, just resigned acceptance. "I understand. You have important responsibilities." "It's not that simple, Maria." "Actually, it is," she replied with quiet wisdom. "Your world and mine. They met for a while, but they were always separate. I always knew that. And if I don't want them to be separate." The words escaped before he could hold them back. Maria studied him at length, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. "What exactly are you saying, Eduardo?" It was a question to which he himself had no clear answer. What did he want? To continue as a mentor, a partner? Or was it the daily presence of Maria, Anna, and Pedro in his life that had unexpectedly become essential? Before he could answer, his cell phone vibrated. The video conference was starting. Tabor was calling again. "I have to go," he muttered, getting up. "We'll continue this conversation later." Maria nodded, but there was something in her eyes, a barrier erected, a protection against future disappointments. "Of course, your two worlds calling, right?" The observation hit Eduardo like a physical truth as he left the store. He was living between two worlds, trying to belong to both, without fully committing to either. How long could he maintain this impossible balance? In the car, he finally opened the folder Carlos had given him. Inside were surveillance photos of him and Maria walking together, reports on her background, financial projections for the store, all presented as if it were a case to be solved, a problem to be eliminated. The anger he felt was not only for Carlos, but for himself. How long had he been the kind of person who would see people like Maria only as statistics, problems, or worse, opportunities for charity? As he drove home, the mansion that once represented his success now seemed like a monument to his loneliness. The expansion of Mayos Cacrium happened faster than anyone could have predicted. 6 months after opening, Maria already employed 4 full-time artisans and offered workshops 3 times a week. The boutique hotel that had ordered the first pieces now wanted an exclusive line for all its branches. "We need more space," Maria explained during lunch with Eduardo, spreading architectural plans on the table at the cafe near the store and more equipment. "But the investment would be substantial," Eduardo added, studying the figures she had meticulously prepared. In recent months, since the interrupted conversation in the store, both had established a more formal professional routine. Eduardo appeared less frequently, but continued to monitor financial reports and offer strategic guidance, a carefully maintained distance that neither of them openly questioned. "I'm thinking of applying for a bank loan." Maria continued to surprise him. "The numbers support the expansion, and well, I need to build my own credit eventually." Eduardo felt a mixture of pride and something close to sadness. Pariah really didn't need him in the same way anymore. "It's a sensible decision," he agreed, maintaining a professional tone. "I can review the proposal for the bank if you like." "Thank you," Maria replied with the same formality. An uncomfortable silence settled between them, the kind of silence laden with unspoken conversations and unexpressed feelings. "How are Anna and Pedro?" Eduardo asked, trying to fill the void. Maria's face lit up, as it always did when she talked about her children. "Anna received a scholarship for the graphic design course she wanted. And Pedro, Pem, he's becoming a small businessman. He started giving math lessons to kids in the neighborhood." Eduardo smiled, missing the presence of teenagers in his life. In the first weeks of the business, he often had dinner with the family. He helped Pedro with his homework and discussed marketing ideas with Anna. Now, with the new professionalization of the relationship, These interactions had ceased. They miss him. Maria commented softly, as if reading his thoughts. They asked, "Why don't you come over for dinner anymore?" "I've been busy," Eduardo replied, the excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. "The company is undergoing restructuring." Maria studied his face for a moment. "Is that all?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Eduardo hesitated, remembering Carlos's folder, the insinuations, the surveillance photos, the cruel reminder of how his corporate world viewed relationships like theirs. "Maybe it's better if we keep things professional," he finally said, hating every word for the sake of the business. Something broke in Maria's gaze, a hope he hadn't even realized existed until he saw it disappear. "Of course," she replied with dignity. "Business always comes first." Eduardo wanted to say that wasn't it, that he was just trying to protect her from the sharks in his world, that he feared his association with her could harm her in some way, but the words stuck in his throat. As they discussed the technical details of the expansion, Eduardo realized that they were both playing roles, the investor and the entrepreneur, as if the last few months of closeness had never happened. As they said goodbye, the formal handshake seemed like a cruel parody of the connection they had built. "I'll email you the revised business plan," Maria said. Her voice was neutral, professional. Eduardo nodded, unable to hold her gaze. "Good luck with the bank." Returning to his car, Eduardo was approached by Anna, who had apparently been waiting for him on the corner. "What's going on with you two?" the teenager asked directly, her frankness reminding him of his mother. "I don't know what you're talking about, Anna. Yes, you do," she insisted. "Suddenly, you hardly ever show up. You act like we're just a charity project. Did you hurt her?" Eduardo felt the impact of her words like a physical blow. "I never wanted to hurt your mother. It's complicated." "No, it's not," Anna retorted with the brutal clarity of youth. "You adults are the ones who complicate everything. She cares about you. You care about her. The rest is nonsense. There are consequences, Anna. Different worlds, different expectations." "Consequences," Anna laughed without humor. "Do you think she didn't pay a price for associating with you? People talk, you know. They say she's yours. Well, you can imagine what they say." The shock must have been visible on his face because Anna continued more gently. "Mom never cared about the rumors. She said it's worth it for what we're building, not just the store, but our friendship with you." Eduardo was speechless, realizing how much unintended damage his protection had caused. "Think about it," Anna said, walking away. "And for your information, we're having pizza for dinner tonight at 7, just like old times." As Anna disappeared around the corner, Eduardo remained motionless, torn between worlds he himself had artificially separated. The decision he needed to make was not about business, expansion, or investments. It was about what kind of life he really wanted to live and with whom he wanted to share it. The board of directors meeting was scheduled to last 2 hours, but it went on for 6. Eduardo presented his restructuring proposal with the clarity and firmness that had made him legendary in the corporate world. "In short, gentlemen, I am stepping down as CEO to take over as chairman of the board," he concluded, ignoring the astonished looks around the table. "Carlos Mendez is more than prepared to lead day-to-day operations while I devote myself to the company's long-term strategic vision. And there are other investments." "What other investments would those be, Eduardo?" asked Marcelo Prado, the longest-serving member of the board. Eduardo smiled for the first time, without masks or strategies, investments in people with human potential. After the stormy departure of some members and intense negotiations with others, the proposal was approved. Carlos, still reeling from the unexpected promotion, approached him as everyone was leaving. "Why are you doing this? Is it because of that woman?" Eduardo considered the question for a moment. "It's because of me, Carlos. I've realized that I don't just want to accumulate money until I die. I want to build something that transforms lives." "We've always done that here," Carlos argued, gesturing to the imposing building around them. "No," Eduardo corrected him gently. "We've built fortunes. It's not the same thing." As he left the building, Eduardo felt a lightness he hadn't experienced since his youth. He glanced at his watch. 6:40 p.m. He still had time. He didn't go home to change out of his suit and into casual clothes. He drove straight to the market, buying 2 bottles of soda that he knew Pedro loved. And then to Maria's apartment. His heart was racing as he climbed the stairs. What would he say? How would he explain the last few months of distance? What if it was too late? Anna opened the door, one eyebrow raised in defiance. You're late. Sorry, work meeting. Eduardo held up the bottles as an offering of peace. Can I come in? Rand studied his face for a moment before letting him in. She's finishing getting ready. The apartment looked different. There were more books on the shelves, a new sofa, a computer on the living room table, small signs of prosperity that filled him with pride. Pedro emerged from his room, visibly grown in the months since Eduardo had last seen him. There was a moment of adolescent hesitation before the boy offered a half smile. Back to the mortal world. Eduardo laughed, recognizing the sarcasm as a form of protection. I guess so. Well, Pedro said simply, picking up one of the bottles. We're eating on the floor. Anna spilled coffee on the carpet and Mom is freaking out. The familiarity of the scene, the modest apartment, the casual conversation, the lack of pretension, made Eduardo realize how much he had missed it all. Eduardo Maria appeared at the kitchen door, her hair wet from a recent shower, wearing jeans and a simple blouse. Her surprise at seeing him was evident. Anna invited me, he explained quickly. I hope everything is okay. A quick glance between mother and daughter communicated some previous conversation that Eduardo couldn't decipher. Of course, Maria, he replied, regaining his composure. There's always room for one more. Dinner began with a palpable tension that gradually dissipated as Anna and Pedro filled the silence with stories about school, friends, and future plans. Eduardo listened attentively, marveling at how much he had missed in just a few months. Anna is considering an internship at Mr. Mendonca's advertising agency, Maria commented, finally addressing him directly. That's wonderful, Eduardo replied, genuinely impressed. Ricardo Mendonca is one of the best in the business. They saw my work on the store's website, Anna explained proudly. The conversation flowed more easily after that, touching on new developments at Mayos Kikriam and plans for expansion. Eduardo listened, admiring Maria's competence and vision. When Anna and Pedro retired to their rooms after dinner, Maria finally confronted the issue. Why did you come back, Eduardo? There was no accusation in her voice, just a sincere curiosity that deserved equal sincerity, because I realized I was trying to live in two worlds, when in fact I had already chosen this one a long time ago. He replied, the words coming out naturally. I was just afraid to admit it. Afraid of what exactly? Eduardo considered the question, searching for the most honest answer. That maybe I cared more about you, about all of you, than would be prudent for an investor. Maria absorbed his words in silence, her eyes studying his face as if looking for signs of insincerity. Today I stepped down from the position of CEO. Eduardo continued to feel the need to fill the silence. I will remain on the board, but I want to devote more time to projects like yours. Talented people who just need a chance. That's what we are to you. A social project? Maria asked, her voice calm but with an intensity that Eduardo knew well. In the beginning, maybe, he admitted, but now you are the most real part of my life. The vulnerability in his confession surprised them both. Maria looked away for a moment, as if processing his words. I don't want you to walk away from everything because of us. She finally said, your company is important to you, but not as important as I realized you are. The silence that followed had a different weight. It was no longer the discomfort of unspoken words, but the necessary pause to absorb what had finally been expressed. Tomorrow I'm going to the bank. Maria changed the subject, but Eduardo noticed that she had moved slightly closer on the sofa to discuss the expansion loan. Do you want me to go with you? Not as my investor, she replied, looking him straight in the eye. But as my partner, perhaps the word partner hung between them, loaded with possibilities that neither of them was ready to fully define. Eduardo reached out, covering her hand on the sofa. Partners, then. A new beginning, not a rescue, not charity, not a project, but a partnership between equals who had learned to see beyond circumstances, to see each other's true value. As Maria smiled, a genuine smile that Eduardo realized he had desperately missed. He understood that he had found something that no corporate success could provide, a purpose greater than himself and people who made him want to be better every day. The community center in the garden. Hope was a simple, exposed brick building surrounded by faded blue-painted railings. On the sidewalk in front, Maria and Eduardo contemplated the makeshift sign. Artisan Fair, Hands That Transform Project. Nervous? Eduardo asked, noticing how Maria repeatedly adjusted her coordinator badge. A little, she admitted. These women trusted me, our training. What if they don't sell anything today? Eduardo smiled, recognizing the same insecurity she had shown at the opening of her own store. Almost a year earlier, they've already won just by being here. Inside the hall, 15 women, most of them single mothers, some former inmates, all with stories of overcoming adversity. They organized their stalls with handmade products created during the 3 months of training offered by Mayoske Kriam, Dona Maria. João Luzia, a 60-year-old woman who had learned to transform glass bottles into decorative lamps. Do you think I set the price too high? Maria approached, examining the meticulous work. On the contrary, Lucia, this is worth more than you are asking. The project had started modestly, with Maria offering free workshops on Saturdays. As it grew, Eduardo suggested formalizing the initiative by creating a social arm of the company. Hands That Transform was born as a professional training program, using part of the profits from the main store to finance materials and scholarships for women in vulnerable situations. Senor Eduardo, a teenager approached timidly. My mother wants to know if you could take a look at her spreadsheets. Eduardo followed the girl to a knitting stand, where a woman with a worried expression was manipulating a calculator. Dona Cita, right? Hana told me about your hats. They're beautiful. The woman blushed slightly. Thank you. I'm just confused about these profit and reinvestment calculations you taught me. As he patiently explained the basic financial concepts, Eduardo reflected on how his life had changed. A year ago, he would have been in a meeting room discussing millions. Today, he was helping a single mother calculate the potential profit from wool hats sold for $20 each. And surprisingly, he felt more satisfaction here. The fair opened to the public, and gradually the hall filled up. Eduardo watched Maria circulating among the stalls, adjusting a decoration here, suggesting a sales approach there, always with a word of encouragement. She's amazing, isn't she? Anna's voice came from beside him. The young woman, now 17, had become a constant presence in social projects. She was responsible for all visual communication and digital marketing. A real game changer, Eduardo agreed, feeling his chest swell with pride. How's the internship going? Great. Mr. Mendonça said he wants to hire me permanently after I graduate. I'm not surprised. Your talent is evident. Anna studied his face for a moment. You two are still in that weird dance, aren't you? What do you mean? Eduardo asked, although he knew exactly what she was referring to. That relationship that isn't a relationship. Everyone sees what's going on except you two. Eduardo sighed. In recent months, his relationship with Maria had evolved into a deep partnership. They had dinner together several times a week. They spent weekends planning new projects. They shared confidences and fears, all the elements of a relationship, except the formal recognition that this was what they had. It's complicated, Anna, only because you complicate it, she retorted, repeating what she had said months before. Do you know what Mom told me yesterday? That she's afraid you'll get tired of this social work and realize you've wasted time you could be using to make more money. The revelation took him by surprise. That's absurd. I've never been happier in my entire life. Then tell her that, not me. Anna walked away to help one of the artisans, leaving Eduardo with his thoughts. Was it possible that Joe and Maria still saw him as the businessman looking for a hobby? Even after everything they had built together, the day progressed and the fair proved to be an unexpected success. The local media coverage organized by Anna attracted a diverse audience. By the end of the afternoon, several artisans had sold their entire stock and received orders. I can't believe it, Lucia exclaimed, counting the money with trembling fingers. I managed to pay 3 months' rent in one day. The impromptu celebration at the end of the fair brought tears to Maria's eyes. As the women shared stories of customers and plans to invest their earnings, Eduardo observed the real, tangible impact his investment in people was having. Thank you for not giving up on us, Maria murmured at his side as they watched the scene. I never could, he replied simply. Later, after helping to dismantle the stalls and clean the hall, they walked together through this simple neighborhood. The sunset painted the sky in orange tones, casting a golden light on the modest streets. Anna told me that you think I'll get tired of all this one day, Eduardo commented softly. Maria stopped walking, turning to him in surprise. She shouldn't have. Is that true? Do you still doubt my commitment? A sigh escaped her lips. It's not doubt, Eduardo. It's being realistic. People like you eventually move on. People like me, he repeated, feeling the weight of the distinction she still maintained between them. What if I told you that there are no more people like me? That there is only me, Eduardo, the man who spent years accumulating money without purpose until he found real meaning by your side. The vulnerability in his voice was palpable. Maria studied him at length, as if trying to see beyond the surface, beyond the story they had both built about who they were. I'm afraid, she finally admitted, her voice almost a whisper, afraid of building something so important with you and then realizing that we've built more than just a business. Eduardo added, taking a step toward her, that maybe we've built a life together without realizing it. The air between them seemed charged with electricity, sparks seeking release. What if it hurts a lot when it's over? Maria said. But she didn't pull away when Eduardo gently touched her face. What if it doesn't end? The kiss that followed was soft, hesitant, laden with questions still unanswered. When they parted, both seemed equally surprised by what had happened. This complicates everything, Maria murmured, but there was a smile trying to form on her lips. Or maybe it simplifies it, Eduardo replied, taking her hand as they resumed their walk. Partners in every sense. As they walked hand in hand through the neighborhood that Eduardo had barely known a year ago, they both knew they had crossed a line of no return. The future, with all its uncertainties, seemed less frightening when faced side by side. The second Mao's Cacrium store opened in a middle-class shopping mall, a strategic expansion that Maria had meticulously planned for months. The decor retained its artisanal essence, but with a more sophisticated touch to cater to the new audience. What do you think? Maria asked Eduardo, as she adjusted the layout of the pieces in the window display. The opening was in 2 hours and the anxiety was palpable. Perfect, he replied sincerely. You've thought of every detail. The last year had been transformative for both of them. The personal relationship they had finally embraced brought a new dimension to their professional partnership. Eduardo sold his mansion and moved into a comfortable apartment in the same neighborhood as Maria, though not in the same building. It was a step that both agreed was hasty, especially considering Anna and Pedro. Mom, the flyers have arrived. Anna burst through the door carrying boxes of promotional material. At 18, she now officially worked as the company's marketing manager, dividing her time between design school and the family business. And the cash register system is working perfectly, Pedro added, emerging from behind the counter, where he was installing the new software he had helped develop. At 14, he already showed an impressive talent for technology and finance. Eduardo watched the family interaction with a smile. Although they did not yet share the same roof, they had built something that went beyond traditional definitions. They were a family united by choice, respect, and shared purpose. Mr. Almeida? A formal voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Marcos Silveira, the mall director. Can we talk in private? The man's tone alerted Eduardo, who discreetly stepped away with Marcos. He noticed his worried expression. We have a problem, Marcos explained, lowering his voice. The Logistics Association is questioning the presence of the hands that create here. Why? Eduardo asked, feeling his old corporate irritation resurfacing. They argue that the social profile of your project does not match the image of the mall. Marcos seemed genuinely embarrassed. Specifically, they are concerned about rumors about the reintegration program for former inmates. Eduardo took a deep breath, controlling his growing anger. The Recomezo program, an extension of Maos que Transformam, offered training and opportunities for women recently released from the prison system. It was an initiative of which Maria was particularly proud. I see, Eduardo replied with calculated calm. And what is your personal position on this, Marcos? The director hesitated. Officially, I must represent the interests of Logistas, but he lowered his voice even further. My sister spent 2 years in prison for a stupid mistake. I know how doors close afterward. Eduardo nodded, understanding the man's dilemma. When is the next association meeting? In 20 minutes in the event hall. I came to let you know because Well, I thought you deserved a chance to defend yourselves. Thank you, I'll be there. When Marcos left, Eduardo returned to Maria, quickly explaining the situation. They want to kick us out before we even open? Maria asked incredulously. Because of the women we're helping? Don't worry, Eduardo tried to reassure her. I'll take care of it. No, Maria replied firmly. We'll take care of it together. This is no longer just your corporate world where you protect poor Maria. Eduardo smiled, recognizing how much she had changed, her insecurity giving way to a serene confidence in her own worth. You're right, partners in everything. Remember? In the event hall, they found about 20 logisticians gathered in a tense atmosphere. Most avoided looking directly at Maria when they entered. Gentlemen, ladies, Eduardo began with the calm, authoritative voice he had used in hundreds of negotiations. I understand there are concerns about our store. A middle-aged man stood up. With all due respect, Mr. Almeida, this mall caters to families, bringing in certain elements. Do you compromise everyone's safety with certain elements? Maria asked, keeping her voice steady despite the obvious tension. Are you referring to the single mothers who train in our program? Or the elderly women who supplement their pensions? Or perhaps the women who are rebuilding their lives after past mistakes? The silence that followed was heavy. Eduardo noticed several uncomfortable expressions. No one wanted to be the explicit villain of discrimination. Perhaps we should consider the hard facts, Eduardo suggested, assuming the tone of a negotiator once again. Our first store increased customer traffic in the region by 30% in the first year. Our events attract people who would not normally frequent local businesses, and our media presence has been exclusively positive. He took some printed reports out of his pocket about the social impact of the project. What I propose is simple. Give us 6 months. If there are any security issues, any drop in sales at neighboring stores, we will leave without protest. A murmur ran through the room. Eduardo realized he was winning some over, but others remained adamant. That's when the door opened. Hannah entered, followed by 6 women of different ages, all wearing hands that transformed t-shirts. Sorry to interrupt, Anna said with surprising confidence for her age, but I thought you should meet some of the threats you fear so much. One by one, the women introduced themselves briefly, telling their stories without melodrama, just the raw truth of their struggles, and how the program had offered them dignity through work. My name is Jeanette, the last woman introduced herself. Appearing to be about 50 years old, she had a dignified bearing, despite the obvious marks of a difficult life. I spent 3 years in prison for a crime I committed. Yes, I stole to feed my children when I lost my job. I'm not proud of it, but I don't hide it either. Today, thanks to Dona Maria, I have my own furniture restoration business and pay my taxes. She looked directly at the man who had spoken against the store. And coincidentally, my daughter has been shopping at your shoe store for years, Mr. Ribeiro. She is the head nurse at the municipal hospital. The revelation had a visible impact. Eduardo observed the power of real stories, dispelling prejudices before his eyes. When the vote finally took place, 15 logisticians approved the 6-month probationary period for creative hands. Back at the store, while the final preparations for the opening were underway, Eduardo found Maria in the small back room, organizing documents. That was intense, she commented, without looking up from the papers. You were incredible, Eduardo replied, admiring her strength. It wasn't always like this, you know. What do you mean? But corporate meetings, before they were only about profits, competition, numbers, never about real people, real impact. Maria finally looked at him, a soft smile on her lips. Welcome to the real world, Mr. Almeida. At that moment, observing the woman who had completely transformed his view of success and purpose, Eduardo realized that he had received much more than he had given on this unexpected journey. You know, I've been thinking, he said, sitting down next to her, about the future, about us. Maria raised an eyebrow, her smile now more mischievous. That sounds seriously like the prelude to a proposal. What if it is? Eduardo asked, suddenly nervous in a way that million-dollar negotiations had never made him feel. Maria's smile widened. Well, I'd say we have an opening in an hour, and important proposals deserve more time and privacy than that. Eduardo Rio, I'm charmed by your practicality. Fair enough, but consider yourself warned. I always appreciate good strategic planning. Maria replied, getting up to give him a quick kiss before returning to the main store. Eduardo lingered for a moment, contemplating the long road from that night at the restaurant to this moment. Who could have imagined that his greatest success would not be measured in money, but in transformed lives, including and especially his own? On stage in the State University auditorium under bright lights, Maria took a deep breath before approaching the microphone. She had never imagined she would be there as a guest speaker for Social Entrepreneurship Week. In the front row, Eduardo smiled encouragingly. Next to him, Ana and Pedro, both now officially working in the family business, waved discreetly. "My name is Maria Oliveira," she began, her voice initially trembling, gaining strength with each word. "3 years ago, I was a cleaning lady, a single mother of 2 children, counting every penny to make ends meet. The audience, composed mainly of students and small entrepreneurs, listened in respectful silence. Today, I coordinate a network of craft stores that directly employs 28 people and has trained more than 200 women in vulnerable situations. But my story is not about numbers. It is about dignity, opportunity, and the transformative power of believing in human potential." For 40 minutes, Maria shared her journey without filters, from the humiliation in the restaurant to the construction of what was now recognized as one of the most inspiring success stories of social entrepreneurship in the country. "True success is not measured in profit, but in transformed lives," she concluded, "including our own." The ovation that followed was overwhelming. Students stood up, many with tears in their eyes. Teachers applauded enthusiastically. In the front row, Eduardo couldn't contain his emotion, his pride overflowing. At the cocktail party after the event, Maria was surrounded by young people eager for advice, teachers interested in partnerships, and even representatives from social investment foundations. "Your story is extraordinary," commented an elegant lady who introduced herself as the director of an international foundation. "We are looking for cases like yours for our global funding program." "Global?" Maria repeated in surprise. "I never thought beyond national borders." "But you should," the woman insisted, handing her a card. Her model could be replicated in several countries. "We would like to talk about possibilities." Eduardo, watching the scene from afar, felt a contradictory emotion. Immense pride for the recognition Maria deserved, but also an undefined fear. International expansion would mean travel, commitments, a whole new scale of operations. "She's shining, isn't she?" Anna commented, approaching with 2 glasses of sparkling wine. "Who would have thought that the shy woman who cleaned your house would become a national icon?" Eduardo felt her accepting the drink. His mother always had that light inside her. She just needed space to shine and someone who could see beyond the circumstances. Anna added, looking at him with sincere gratitude, "Thank you for that." Later, at the hotel where they would stay before returning to the city the next day, Eduardo found Maria on the balcony of the room, contemplating the lights of the university town. "Still taking it all in?" he asked, hugging her from behind. "It seems unreal," she confessed. "That woman from the foundation talked about taking our model to other countries, Eduardo." "Other countries? You deserve all this recognition." Maria turned in his arms, studying his face. "But what do you mean? I know that tone. Something is worrying you." Eduardo hesitated, choosing his words carefully, just thinking about the implications. International expansion, constant travel. It's a path of no return. Maria watched him for a long moment. "You think we shouldn't consider it, don't you?" Eduardo hastened to clarify. "It's just that everything is so good right now. Our life together, the family we've built, the balance we've found." Understanding softened Maria's features. "You're afraid of losing me to success, just as I feared you would return to your corporate world." The observation was so accurate that Eduardo couldn't deny it. "Ironic, isn't it? I always put my career first, now fearing that you'll do the same." Maria smiled, touching his face tenderly. "We built this together, Eduardo. Any next step we take will also be together. Even if it means completely new worlds, especially if it means new worlds," she replied. "Isn't that what we've been doing since the beginning? Breaking down barriers between different worlds?" The wisdom in her words struck him deeply. Since that night at the restaurant, they had been constantly crossing social, economic, and personal boundaries, redrawing limits and redefining possibilities. "I have something for you," Eduardo said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket. He had planned to do it in a more elaborate one, but the small blue velvet box seemed to glow in the soft light of the balcony. Maria held her breath as he opened it, revealing a white gold ring with a single discreet diamond. It's not the biggest or most expensive, Eduardo explained, nervous like a teenager. I thought you'd prefer something simple, elegant like you. It's perfect, Maria whispered, her eyes watering. But are you sure? Everything is changing so fast. Eduardo took her hands in his. The only thing I'm sure of is that I want to face all these changes with you by my side, officially and completely. As partners in every sense, Maria added, recalling her own words from months ago. Maria Oliveira, you taught me the true meaning of success, purpose, and family. Marry me. Tears now streamed freely down her face. Yes, she replied simply, yes, to new beginnings, new worlds, new challenges. Together. As the ring slid onto her finger, they both knew they were on the cusp of a new chapter. One that neither of them could have imagined 3 years earlier, when they were just boss and employee, separated by worlds that seemed irreconcilable. I think we need to tell Anna and Pedro, Maria commented, admiring the ring on her finger. Although I suspect they've been waiting for this for a long time. Eduardo laughed, hugging her again. Anna is probably already planning the wedding behind our backs. On the horizon of the university town, the lights seem brighter now, like endless possibilities waiting to be explored. And for the first time, the future, with all its uncertainties and challenges, did not seem scary, but rather an exciting promise of continued growth together. The headquarters of the Maus could Transformum Foundation occupied an old restored mansion in the city center. In the spacious main hall, decorated with handcrafted pieces from different regions of the country, Maria was finishing the final adjustments to the annual report presentation. 5 years had passed since that lecture at the university. Years of rapid growth, challenges overcome, and dreams realized beyond all expectations. The international representatives have arrived, Anna announced as she entered the room. At 23, she was now the foundation's communications director, with a newly earned MBA and unshakable confidence. And Pedro just called. He's leaving college and coming straight here. Maria smiled proudly at her children, who had become extraordinary adults. Pedro, at 19, divided his time between his economics course and the development of the foundation's management systems. And Eduardo is finishing his meeting with investors. He said he'll be here in 20 minutes. There's time for his presentation. Their wedding, held 3 years earlier in an intimate ceremony in the garden of the new home they shared, had solidified a partnership that transcended conventional definitions. They were not just husband and wife, but mission partners, confidants, and eternal admirers of each other's growth. The decision to transform the hands that create into an international foundation came naturally after the success of pilot projects in Uruguay and Colombia. The model developed by Maria, combining technical training with financial education and psychosocial support, had proven adaptable to different cultural contexts. Eduardo, for his part, had found his true purpose as a fundraiser and strategist for partnerships. His corporate experience, once a source of existential emptiness, now served a greater purpose. Ready to announce the big news, Han asked, adjusting the projector. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the familiar butterflies in her stomach that preceded important moments. It still seems surreal. What? The UN funding or the nomination for the Social Entrepreneurship Award? Everything, Maria replied, running her hand over the handmade necklace she was wearing, a gift from the first artisans trained by the program. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm back in that small apartment, rushing not to miss the bus to go clean houses. Anna hugged her mother affectionately. Did you build all this with your own hands, Mom? Literally, the hall gradually began to fill up with representatives from partner organizations, funders, journalists, and the artisans themselves who formed the beating heart of the foundation. Among them, familiar faces such as Lucia, now coordinator of a regional unit, and Jeanette, who had become a respected mentor for women in post-prison situations. Eduardo arrived minutes before the presentation began, his impeccable suit contrasting with his relaxed smile, a combination that reflected his new identity, a hybrid between the executive he had been and the man of purpose he had become. Sorry I'm late, he whispered, kissing Maria quickly. Good news. The Social Investment Fund has confirmed its contribution to the African project. Maria's eyes lit up. Does that mean we can start in Mozambique as early as next quarter? Eduardo nodded proudly. Just as you planned. When Maria took the stage to begin her presentation, Eduardo sat in the front row next to Anna. The feeling of fulfillment that overwhelmed him in those moments still surprised him. As if each of Maria's achievements were also his, each life transformed a testimony to the power of seeing potential where others saw only circumstances. Good afternoon, everyone, Maria began. Her voice was now firm and confident in front of any audience. Welcome to the presentation of the annual report of the Maus que Transformam Foundation. The images on the screen showed impressive numbers. More than 2,000 direct beneficiaries, presence in 5 Brazilian states and 3 countries, international recognition as a model of sustainable social business. But beyond the numbers, Maria continued, I want to share with you the true impact of our work because we don't measure success in figures, but in stories of transformation. The video that followed showed moving testimonials. The former prisoner, now a micro-entrepreneur, the single mother who had managed to buy her own home, the elderly woman who rediscovered her purpose through handicrafts. Each of these women, Maria explained, her voice filled with emotion, carries in her hands not only the ability to create beauty, but the power to redesign her own destiny. Eduardo watched the woman on stage with renewed admiration. The woman who once trembled with shame at not being able to pay for 2 cups of coffee now led an international organization with ease and vision. After the formal presentation, during the cocktail party, Eduardo approached Maria, who was talking to UN representatives. Excuse me, he said politely, may I steal the president for a moment? He took her to a quieter corner of the hall where Pedro was already waiting for them with Anna. The 4 of them now formed an indivisible unit, a family built on choices, not just circumstances. A toast, Eduardo proposed, raising his glass, to the woman who taught us that working hands can, in fact, redraw destinies. And to the man who had the wisdom to see beyond appearances, Maria added, looking at him with love, who saw value where others saw only service. And to the most patient children in the world, Anna joked, who put up with you 2 dancing in circles for so long before admitting the obvious. Everyone laughed, united by shared memories and a future they continued to build together. Later that night at home, Maria and Eduardo sat on the porch, contemplating the garden lit by small, handmade lights, creations of the project's first classes. Think of the contrast, Maria commented, leaning on his shoulder from the humiliation of that night at the restaurant to international recognition. Eduardo kissed her forehead affectionately. Life has an interesting sense of humor. Sometimes our lowest moments are just preparation for higher flights or unexpected encounters with people who change everything, she added, intertwining her fingers with his. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the sound of crickets in the garden and the shared knowledge that, regardless of future challenges, they would face them together no longer as boss and employee, not just as husband and wife, but as partners on a journey that transcended labels and expectations. You know what impresses me the most? Eduardo reflected, breaking the silence. How something seemingly so small, a gesture in a restaurant, a business proposal, can trigger such profound transformations. Maria smiled, understanding perfectly. It is because it is never really external events that transform us. It is the choices we make in the face of them. Choosing to see humanity where others see only functions. Choosing dignity where others would accept humiliation. Choosing to build bridges where society puts up walls. Eduardo nodded, amazed as always by the natural wisdom of this extraordinary woman whom fate had placed in his path. True transformation, Maria concluded, looking at the hands that had once been mere cleaning tools and now created opportunities for so many. It happens when we realize that we all have the power to weave our own destinies, regardless of where we start. And as the stars shone above them, 2 people from seemingly irreconcilable worlds, now united in purpose and love, understood that the greatest work of art they had created together was not a company, a foundation, or even a family, but living proof that when the barriers of prejudice and circumstance are broken down, We can all recognize in each other the same essential value that resides in ourselves.